My name is Michael Mabee. I'm a New Hampshire resident. Moved here in 2016 from the People's Republic of Connecticut. Happy to be here in New Hampshire. Okay, excellent. So, how many people do we have here that are from CERT teams? Or Medical Reserve Corps people? Excellent. Okay. How many people from DHS and FEMA? We've got a couple. Yes. Excellent. Okay. There's a little bit of doom and gloom this morning, I know, and when I first started kind of studying the threats of the electric grid, it's very easy to kind of get overwhelmed. And it's very easy to look at this and say, oh my gosh, this is such a horrific problem. What can I possibly do about it as a citizen? Well, we're here this afternoon. This morning was the problem. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about solutions. We've got a great program, and we're going to be talking about what we can all be doing in our communities. So what we know is that the U.S. is not prepared for a national scale catastrophe. Not only do we know this, but the government admits it. We all know it. We're not prepared for a national scale catastrophe. The good news is the solution is right here in this room. Where are the CERT people again? Raise your hands. Okay, CERT people, you are the Green Berets in this fight. And I'm going to explain later exactly what I mean by that for those who don't get the distinction of what really a Green Beret is. And where are my FEMA people, particularly Arlene and David? Okay, you guys are instrumental, and what you're doing in the communities is extremely commendable. I am very, very happy that they're here today because FEMA is our partner in this fight, and there's a lot of resources available to help us get our communities prepared. So let's talk for a minute. I'm going to do a little bit of doom and gloom, and then we'll go into the solutions. But just what have we learned from some of the power outages that we've seen in the past, some of the stuff that's actually happened? So, we've been talking this morning about, electromagnetic pulse attack. Well, that's never actually happened yet. A lot of countries have the capability to do it, and it could happen. It hasn't actually happened yet. A large-scale solar flare that has happened, but not since we've had, the sophisticated electric grid that we have today. The last one was in 1859. But, it is going to happen again. But here's some things that actually have happened. Hurricane Maria last year, the entire island of Puerto Rico out of power. People out of power for months. People without potable water for months. Now imagine that. Now most of us have been through a power outage. How many people here have been through a power outage that was over a week? Okay, we're in New England, so we got a few of us here. So 11 days right here. That's the longest power outage I've done. So, some of us have, but most of us have been through a power outage of a day or two, and, somebody's going to rescue us, we'll be okay. Here's another one. Just happened. Hurricane Michael, 1.8 million people out of power. And, what they were talking about is we're back to frontier days. It was so bad down there. I'm not even talking about Hurricane Katrina and some of the other ones. The Great Northeast Blackout of 2003, and at the time that hit, I was right there. That was my office. I was in Manhattan when this one hit. Now, does anybody remember what caused this blackout, Great Northeast Blackout of 2003?
It was something with Canada grid and the opportunity to wire.
No?
Tree branch.
Oh, yeah, he knows. He's cheating back there. A tree branch in Ohio. Okay, so tree branch in Ohio, and a little more complicated than that, but it started a cascading failure when some untrimmed foliage in Ohio hit electric lines, and through a series of mechanical errors, computer errors, and human errors, it cascaded into a blackout where 55 million people were out of power. 45 million in the United States, 10 million in Canada, from literally a tree branch in Ohio causing this cascading failure. New York City blackout, and you can't really see it because there's no electricity. So, New York City blackout of 77, and Tommy Waller talked about this a little bit. This is a 24-hour blackout where over 1,000 fires were set by arsonists, 1,600 businesses destroyed, 4,000 people arrested. They had to call in the National Guard to restore order in a 24-hour blackout. So this one kind of scares me because this is a 24-hour blackout. So, geez, what would happen if there was a longer blackout than that? The Quebec blackout, actually a couple people talked about this one today. So this was a solar flare in 1989, a small solar flare. We're not talking about like the Carrington event in 1859, we're talking about a relatively small solar flare that took out Quebec Hydro's grid and damaged equipment. Now, most people in the United States don't remember this, or it didn't really affect us, so maybe we didn't really pay attention. And they don't really realize that every single day the sun is sending out solar flares in every direction. And it's a mathematical certainty that the Earth will be hit again with a large solar flare. We just don't know when. It might be next year, it might be 10 years from now. We don't know when, but we can say with 100% certainty that the Earth will be hit with a large solar flare at some point in the future. And our grid is not hardened to withstand that type of thing. Now, these are extremely scary to me, and a lot of people in America don't really pay too much attention maybe to what goes on overseas, but the Ukraine suffered blackouts 2 years in a row in 2015, 2016. Anybody know what caused these? Did I hear somebody say Russia? Okay. Did I hear somebody say cyber attack? Did anybody say a cyber attack from Russia? Okay, so this is believed, these were both cyber attacks that took out Ukraine's grid. Believed to have come from Russia. Of course, I'm not privy to the classified information and everything, but it's believed that's where it originated from. But these are cyber attacks that actually took out an electric grid. And we know for a fact from our own government that the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians have been inside our electric grid in cyber activity already. This has been widely reported, especially even this year. People are hearing about cyber, but obviously, well, they'll take care of it. They're not going to allow this to happen to us, right? I'm here to tell you that having been involved in the cybersecurity fight, along with some of the people from the Secure the Grid Coalition, that's going to take us, people, to get involved in this, to get cybersecurity protections to the electric grid. It's not going to just happen without us making sure it happens. What's that? Yeah. You need a pretty big version of it, I think. Physical attacks on the grid. Now, we know terrorists have done very sophisticated attacks. I mean, how do you actually hijack 4 planes at once and run them into buildings? That's, takes a level of sophistication, right? Well, how hard would it be to attack just several of these key transformers in the United States, which are guarded by these really, really strong chain link fences? As you're going up the street, you see all that electrical stuff behind a chain link fence. That's what we're talking about. Those are these high voltage transformers. Yeah, exactly. At least the roads will be clear for the terrorists to go up and get to them. But and then Tom Popick was talking about this one up in Canada. I just heard about this the other day, and I'm actually interested in this stuff, and I get Google alerts and all this news. And just the other day, I saw this article: pilot to be sentenced for sabotage that crippled Quebec's power grid. It was the first I had heard of this, and so I looked into it. Now there aren't a whole lot of details available because the court hearing largely was kept out of the public because I guess they don't want other people to copycat and know exactly what this person did. It sounded to me like Tom had some pretty good information on how this happened. But a physical attack, like Frank Gaffney was talking about, on the California substation, physical attack is a very, very real threat. Electromagnetic pulse, actually this was the first time last fall that I actually saw this hit the mainstream media, where they started talking about this when North Korea detonated an H-bomb. They detonated a couple of A-bombs before, atom bombs, but when they finally detonated what they claimed was a hydrogen bomb, and which we believe was a hydrogen bomb, that's exactly the type of weapon you need for an electromagnetic pulse attack. And actually that ended up getting reported in a lot of the mainstream media, but again, many of our fellow citizens, I mean, the reason you're here today is because you're taking an interest and you're at least partially awake. Most of our fellow citizens didn't pay any attention to this or didn't understand the implications of it. So this is where we need to all go out and talk to our neighbors. So to recap, the threats to the electric grid, we know the weather, we've seen solar flares, cyber attack, terrorist attack, physical attack, earthquake. Pandemic is actually listed by the Department of Energy as one of the threats to the electric grid. An EMP weapon, human or computer error, a tree branch, or perhaps even a squirrel. So we have all of these threats to the electric grid that we know about, that are there, that exists. So obviously the US government must be doing something about this, right? So here's a report from the Senate Homeland Security Committee about a year and a half ago, March 28, 2017. And so this is what the Senate said about this. The Senate said that a successful nuclear electromagnetic pulse attack against the United States could cause the death of approximately 90% of the American population. Similarly, a geomagnetic disturbance, a GMD, could have equally devastating effects on the power grid. This is what the Senate said. This is a public report that was out there. How many of our citizens know this? I mean, is that disturbing? So I find it very disturbing. Oh, well, come on. That's crazy. There's no possible way. 90% of the US population. Okay, let's say they're wrong. Let's say it's 40%. That's over 100 million people. Is that acceptable? No, it's not. So whatever you want to say, whether that 90% is too high, pick a percentage. 5% is unacceptable. That's millions of people. We cannot allow this to happen. We absolutely have to be prepared and continue the fight to get the grid hardened, but we also need to be prepared as communities so this doesn't happen. Now, does anybody remember Benjamin Disraeli? If you do, you're really old because he was from like 2 centuries ago. But a famous British statesman, who famously said, "What we learn from history is that we do not learn from history." And as a military historian, part-time hobby, that's absolutely true. We've never learned from any war we ever fought, I can assure you. But there's actually a more modern American philosopher who said something that I think is a little bit more applicable to what we're talking about today, which is actually sometimes what's more dangerous than not learning from history is learning from history. What do I mean from that? What have we learned from power outages in our experience in this country? We've learned that they last a couple hours. They last a couple days. Somebody's going to rescue us. We're going to bring in utility trucks from Montana. FEMA's coming. Somebody's going to rescue us. That's dangerous, folks. That's that's what we call complacency. So we're used to these short power outages. It's okay. We got a generator in the garage, a 5-gallon gas can. But we need to be thinking about what would happen if there was a longer-term outage. This is from Hurricane Katrina, and I'm going to say something controversial. If you're sitting next to an emergency manager, watch them because they're about to cringe, okay? Hurricane Maria and Hurricane Katrina were best-case scenarios. They were really best, and as horrible as they were, and all the news criticism of everything that might have gone on, they were best-case scenarios. Why? Because they were in a localized or regional area, the disaster area, and elsewhere in the country, everything was okay. So we could bring in massive resources. Look at Hurricane Maria. FEMA was there ahead of time, before the storm even hit. We brought in massive resources from everywhere in the country, and it was still that bad. It was still that bad. So, what would a national scale disaster look like? Well, the very strength of our present emergency management system, which has served us so well for so many years, for so many disasters, also has a critical weakness. And the critical weakness is that we believe that this system will expand if the disaster overwhelms our local capabilities. We can call in mutual aid, we can call in the state, we can call in the federal government. So we always believe that we can call in outside resources. But guess what, folks? There are 35,000 towns and cities in the United States. 35,000 towns and cities in the United States. So what happens if substantially all of those 35,000 towns and cities in the United States are the disaster area? Where is the help going to come from? Well, Even FEMA says current planning does not include any contingencies for a very long-term or extremely widespread outages. Now, I believe this is changing, and some of the very people in this room you're going to hear after me from one of the people from FEMA who's actually doing exercises on prolonged power outages. So, but as of right now, I'm telling you, there is no plan. So the plan is right here in the room. FEMA cannot helicopter in MREs and water to 35,000 towns and cities in the United States. They cannot do it. And matter of fact, the administrator of FEMA, Brock Long, has said repeatedly that, the local level is where this has got to come from. We are the disaster responders. We are the ones who have got to do pre-disaster mitigation. It's got to be at the local level, supported by the state and FEMA, but it is here in this room. We are the ones that have to do this. We can't be waiting for somebody to come and rescue us. The Calvary is not coming. This is the mindset that we need to have. We can't wait for aid to come like manna from heaven above in a disaster. We need to think ahead of time about what we're going to need. Survival is going to be a local issue. It's going to be the issue for your town mayor is going to have to be thinking about survival. Your local police chief. Who are my emergency managers in this room? I got a couple of them here. Okay. Emergency managers, you're holding this almost empty bag, during a long-term power outage. Everybody's looking to you. What do we do? So it would be prudent for all of us to think about that ahead of time so we have a good answer, right? So that's exactly why we're here today. Our towns are going to be on their own if there's a long-term power outage, a national scale disaster. We've never experienced a national scale disaster in this country. You realize that? But we haven't. The worst hurricane, the worst earthquake, the worst anything that we had, we could still always bring in outside resources. And that's what we're conditioned to, and that's why sometimes learning from the past can cause complacency. So what would happen in a long-term power outage? Well, really quickly, this is just day one. Day one, people will be without heat, air conditioning, and refrigeration. That'll go. Water and well pumps will stop. So we're up in New Hampshire, so I'm guessing, raise your hand if you've got well water. Okay, that's probably the majority of us. And then city water, raise your hand. Okay. Either way, now the good news is if you have city water, they have some backup generators sometimes, so you might keep your water for a little bit, but then they're going to run out of fuel. Us people with well pumps, once the power goes out, well pump's done, stops working without electricity. We have a generator, but then maybe we run out of gas. Let's take back down that. Okay, sewer and sanitation services will stop. Well, it's not really a sexy topic, but guess what? Lots of people are going to die from waterborne diseases. In America, we don't consider ourselves a third world country, but America without the electric grid, that's exactly what we are, and we're going to be dying in droves from waterborne diseases if we don't think about this ahead of time. Why? Because since our well pumps don't work and our city water's gone, where are we going to get water from? Questionable water sources. Do your neighbors know how to safely purify water? We all know, as CERT team members know how to do it, but do our neighbors know? Probably not. What if they just go to the pond or the river and get some water? Then they start coming down with waterborne diseases. Food is going to stop coming in. Fuel is going to stop coming in. Medicine and medical supplies to pharmacies are going to stop. Backup generators only have so many fuels. Now this is on day one, okay? That's day one. So why don't we go to a month into it? Emergency generators are long out of fuel. People are starving. People are sick from waterborne diseases. People are getting injured because they're going out and doing things they don't normally do. How many people here chop your own wood? Well, this is New Hampshire, so we got a couple. But if people need to stay warm, they're going to get there. Are a lot of people who've never chopped wood in their life, and they're going to go out and they're going to get a horrific laceration because they don't know how to do it. So people are going to be doing non-traditional tasks and getting injured. Medical services are scant or non-existent. Armed gangs are going from house to house because people are starving. And guess what? Remember the 1977 blackout in New York City? People do not always behave. We do have great examples in this country of people behaving. I would say the hurricane out in Texas is a great example of neighbors helping neighbors, and the Cajun Navy going around and rescuing people. So I think, generally speaking, we're all good people in America, and we want to do the right thing. But when our families are starving, we're going to look for food wherever we can find it. Emergency personnel, fire, EMS, and police, are they going to still be coming into work if they feel that their families are in danger? You know, is the National Guard still going to be showing up if they feel their families are in danger? You know, I'm a federal employee. We do continuity of government. So, you know, I mean, if there's ever a disaster, we can keep the government going. And I absolutely will go into work and help keep the government going if my family's okay. If they're not okay, I'm not going. You know, my family is my first priority, right? So, you know, the resources we think we might have, we may not have. And the state and the federal government are nowhere to be found because there's 35,000 towns and cities in the United States that are now the disaster area, and nobody's picking up the phone when we call. Millions could die, and desperate people will resort to anything to get food and resources, and then we can experience a societal collapse. Now, we've seen little examples of this over the years. So with the 77 blackout, Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Katrina, you had 200 cops turning their badges. Why did most of them do that? Because they needed to take care of their families.
And the newspaper couldn't spell either.
Well, yeah, that's very true too. But they, you know, so the law enforcement assets that they thought they might have, they didn't have in Katrina. So, but yeah, you know, we were still able to bring in, you know, massive resources and law enforcement from elsewhere in the National Guard. But we've seen this before. We've seen on small scale anarchy break out. But then what happens if it's a large scale disaster? You know, we've never experienced something like that. So the local governments have to plan for the basic needs for survival for their citizens. They've got to think about this. You know, we can't expect that somebody else is going to think about this and everybody's going to be rescued somehow. We need to be thinking about what are we going to do about food, water, shelter, and security. We have to cover those areas, and this isn't something that we can just expect somebody else to do. That's the people in this room. We've got to come up with the solutions for how is our town, your local town, going to come up with a solution for these things. And there's a lot we can do. The good news here is, we put our minds together, we can come up with a lot of solutions that will mitigate a tremendous loss of life which will occur if we don't plan. So we need to plan ahead of time. Food, for example. If we can protect the existing food, if you have a grocery store in your town, if it's going to get looted, we need to find a way to protect that so it doesn't get looted. A lot of grocery stores, believe it or not, and a lot of people don't know this, they don't have backup generators. If there's a power outage and they lose all their frozen food and their meat, do they care? No. They have insurance. So not all your groceries, some do have generators, but if you live in a town that has a grocery store, you know, you may want to partner with that grocery store and find a way that there's some incentive for them to have a generator so that you can keep that food viable for a longer period of time. Storing food. We need to talk to our fellow citizens. I mean, you know, the old FEMA checklist, which I'm a big fan of, by the way. I think that the FEMA emergency preparedness checklist covers just about everything. So if you have that, you can extrapolate it out to whatever time frame you want. You know, so FEMA suggests that we have 72 hours worth of non-perishable foods. I think most of us in this room believe that we should go multiples higher than that, you know, in terms of long-term power outage. But how much food do all of our neighbors have in their pantries? You know, how much non-perishable foods do we have? So how many meals away from starvation are we in our towns? We need to work on that. We need to get out to our neighbors and be encouraging them. You know, hey, look, when there's a sale at Market Basket, buy more non-perishable goods and just rotate them in. You know, we're not talking about you know, having, you know, pails and pails of, you know, rice stored in Mylar bags in your cellar, which I do have, by the way. But, you know, you don't have to go to that extreme. But what you have to do is think about it and make sure you've got enough non-perishable food in your house that your family's okay for whatever time period you feel is prudent. That's the message we need to give to our neighbors. And once we show them the other, you know, the power outages and, you know, what could happen, and it might be weeks or months, hopefully we get them thinking about this. And the other thing you can do is produce food. Now, we've got, you know, we're up here in New Hampshire, it's kind of rural, and there are farms, but guess what? All of those farms depend on electricity and fuel. So what can we do ahead of time where maybe we don't lose all of our food production? You know, where, you know, we can still be able to produce food. You know, is there a way that we can teach aquaponics that can be done year-round to produce food? Are there other ways that, we can look at where in a long-term power outage, where's the food going to come from? We have to answer that question. So, what are things we can do? Is everybody going to be happy and gain weight? No. But will lots of people survive who would have died of starvation? If we hadn't thought about this. So, all things to think about. Water. We need to protect our water sources. So if your backup water source is a river, do you know what's upriver? And now that the grid's down, is there some factory up there that's going to be affected? And is this water even going to be viable? When there's a long-term outage, we need to think about that. What are our water sources? How can we protect them? Having ways to purify water. The EPA's got a wonderful, wonderful fact sheet on how to purify water. Many different methods of doing it. Not all of our neighbors have that piece of paper, which will save millions of lives in the United States. If we can get that piece of paper into all the households in our communities, so that when something happens that these people aren't thinking about and that they're complacent about, they can pull it out and see, gee, I can purify water with regular household bleach. I can purify water by a number of different simple methods. That one piece of paper in the hands of some capable CERT teams can go a long way towards mitigating a lot of suffering. And also anybody in here ever heard of a baler bucket? Okay, so I got 3 preppers or people who've listened to my presentations before. So if you've got a well and the grid goes down, your well pump doesn't work, right? But you got a generator, so you're all set with your 5-gallon gas can. Now, once your generator runs out of gas, how can you get water out of that well?
Hand pump.
If you've got it installed ahead of time, good luck finding a plumber during the apocalypse. So what you can do, though, is a very simple thing called a baler bucket, which has a one-way valve. You just pop the cap off your well in the backyard. You can lower it down with a rope. It hits the water. The valve opens up. It fills up with water. You pull it back up. Now, my well's pretty deep, so that means Ryan, our camera guy, is going to be pulling a lot of rope in the apocalypse because he's my nephew and he lives with me. So that's going to be your job, Ryan. But you can get water out of the well off grid, but nobody knows this. Nobody knows this. So we need to get that knowledge out there. Dale Rowley was just telling me about another way you can do this, which hopefully he'll talk about, but if not, bother him before you leave. But there's another company in Maine that's developed another way to get water out. But we've got to think about these things ahead of time. Otherwise, people are going to go to the pond and the river and get sick. Shelter is our worst case. Now, up here, our worst case scenario is probably January, but out in Texas, it might, or in the South, it might be July. But remember, without power, our houses, which were all designed to function with electricity, no longer are the great shelters that they are now. If you don't have electricity, a lot of stuff works. Your heating and your cooling doesn't work. How many people here have wood stoves? Because this is New Hampshire, so a lot of us do. Excellent. Now, if you got a wood stove and you don't have 3 cords of wood in your backyard, your plan's probably not completely viable. So a lot of people do have a fireplace, and there are 3 logs in there, and then, during the summer you put in the 3 candles, and then in the fall you put the 3 logs back in. So fireplace, great way, to generate heat, but you got to think about, what am I going to fuel it with? And when the power goes out, it's a little too late to order 3 cords of wood. So we want to think about these things ahead of time. Sewer and septic. Do people even know how to go to the bathroom if there is no bathroom? We used to know how to do that, but a lot of people probably don't. So if they end up doing it the wrong way, what do we get? Waterborne diseases. People get sick. So we need to be able to educate people, okay, if the power goes out, this is how your family can safely go to the bathroom. These are the ways to do it. And cooking. How many people here have electric stoves? So, yep, some people do. So, as you know, if you got a generator, you're fine for as long as you got gas, then your electric stove's all done. I have a propane stove. Good as long as I have propane, but I'm going to run out eventually, then that's done. So now how are you going to cook? How are you going to heat? If you need to boil water to purify it, how are you going to do that? You want to think about these things ahead of time. And these are all things that the people in this room, especially, I'm looking at my CERT people and my FEMA people, we need to be teaching people.
Personal hygiene.
It is awfully difficult if you don't have water, isn't it? And that is another way that people are going to get sick, is because our whole personal hygiene habits are going to change if the grid goes down for a long period of time. Excellent point. Now, security, let's talk about. Now, this is something that that we don't talk about too much because we've never really experienced a large-scale societal collapse. You know, in 1977, oh, you can bring in the National Guard. Katrina, oh, you can bring in the National Guard. Okay, so if there's a societal collapse, we'll bring in the National Guard, right? Okay, well, what if it's a long-term, nationwide power outage? Is Private Snuffy from the New Hampshire National Guard going to show up to work if his family is in danger? I don't know. Maybe. But, can we depend on that? We need to depend on ourselves. I've only got I live in a very small town. We've got a couple cops. And we have enough law enforcement, for normal times. If times get bad, they call in cops from other towns. And the towns in New Hampshire are really good about supporting each other. Most of our towns have very, very small police departments, small fire departments. They all support each other. But if it's a nationwide power outage, and if everybody's a disaster area, where is your mutual aid coming from? We need to think about this ahead of time. What if, everyone in this room, our primary thing that we can do if we see something illegal, immoral, unethical, or annoying is we can call 911, and 911 will come and take care of the problem. What happens if there is no 911? So what are the backup plans for security? One of my favorite ones is a dog, because I was a cop, and if a bad guy comes up the driveway and hears a dog barking, he may decide, I'm going to go find a softer target. So I love dogs. I think they're great for security. But we need to think about that because we're not preparing for the world we live in. We're preparing for the world we find ourselves in. And the world without the grid is a completely different world than the one we live in now. So security's got to be something that every community thinks about. How are we going to handle this? And you may notice I kind of love the civil defense concept, but there's other considerations, and I think we've lost this in America. We've lost communities thinking about how they're going to survive from a cataclysmic disaster, and we used to worry about a nuclear war, and we used to have civil defense, and we used to think about these things, and we used to store food and water and have a plan. In Hawaii, anybody remember that false ballistic missile alert recently? Well, the press, when they were reporting about that, they interviewed just somebody off the street from Hawaii, and what this person said was so disturbing to me, was so very, very disturbing. He said, we didn't know what to do. They all got this alert on their phone, incoming ballistic missiles. This is not a drill. The people did not know what to do. That is horrific to me, that we are in that state of unpreparedness in the United States. There's a good news story coming up about that, though. So we need to think about medical, communications. Where are my ham radio operators in here? Okay, we got a bunch of them. You people are going to be critical. Communications, sanitation, safety, power, fuel, and really maintaining democracy. Because what is anarchy? Anarchy is when the government becomes ineffective. If the government cannot provide food, shelter, security to the people, that's where you get societal collapse. That's what we have to prevent. Now, the good news is you can prevent societal collapse with a plan, but you have to have a plan ahead of time, and there are things you have to do ahead of time to make sure that your government maintains its effectiveness so that you don't have a societal collapse. Another thing that we can think about, and I don't know a whole lot about this yet, but I do know there is a city in California, Borrego Springs, California. It has its own microgrid and its own generation. They got so sick of power outages because they're on the end of a transmission line, and every time there was a power outage anywhere else, like Domino's, they were always going out of power. They got sick of it. They created a microgrid. They have their own generation. They can island themselves off if there's a power outage, and they're okay. What can we do in our communities to think about, well, if the power's going to go out, can we, microgrid ourselves off? Wallingford, Connecticut has its own grid. And during the ice storm in 2011, when I was out of power for 11 days, everyone else in Connecticut is out of power. Wallingford, Connecticut still had power because they maintain their own grid. Their grid's a lot harder than everybody else surrounding them. Now, the problem they have is they don't generate anything, so if the generation goes down, they're in the same boat as the rest of us. but there are things that we can do as communities to harden ourselves. Well, what is civil defense? And a friend of mine down in Virginia on the Secure the Grid Coalition kind of coined this term continuity of community, because, like in the government, we love terms, so we have continuity of government, continuity of operations. So continuity of community is basically what civil defense is, the local government remains effective. We have plans for things that we know are going to happen. If the grid goes down long-term nationwide, we know what's going to happen. It's not hard to figure out, but we thought about it ahead of time, and we've got a plan to mitigate some of the worst things that are going to happen. Food, water, shelter, security. What about medical? Look what happened in Hurricane Katrina to the medical system. You had patients actually die in hospitals and convalescent homes for lack of care, because the medical system completely collapsed. So we need to think about this ahead of time. Long-term power outage. Who's the Medical Reserve Corps people here? Got a couple of them. There's one. Okay, this is where you people come in. So we need to figure out, and if you don't have a Medical Reserve Corps in your community, you need to find the doctors and nurses and paramedics and EMTs and pick their brains. What are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? If we need to have our own medical facility, what do we need? How are we going to get it? Needed skills and resources. Every one of our communities, we've got carpenters, we've got electricians, we've got engineers, we've got cops, we've got retired military, we've got nurses, doctors. We've got everything we need, but guess what? We don't know where they are yet. We need to find them and get them involved in civil defense in our community. So, well, who says civil defense is a good idea? Well, I'll tell you what. Where I came into this fight was right here. In 2012, a bipartisan group, and you don't hear that term much. Does everybody know what bipartisan means as it applies to Congress? We haven't seen it in a decade or so, but a bipartisan group in Congress came up with a resolution. They became concerned about the threats to the electric grid, and they said that community-based civil defense and power generation needs to be something that everybody is aware of. And moreover, they said that all of the communities need to develop their own civil defense program, working with everybody in the community, citizens, faith-based groups, businesses, everybody. Every individual's got to come up with an emergency plan to prepare for the absence of government assistance for extended periods, and encouraging the communities to generate at least 20% of their needs: food, water, electricity. And so this is two Democrats and two Republicans who saw this problem, and they got together and they did this resolution, and it died in committee. It never saw the light of day. We need this in New Hampshire. We need the New Hampshire legislature to pass something like this. We need the federal legislature to do that. And believe me, the Secure the Grid Coalition, we're going to continue to fight the fight on the national level. But here in New Hampshire, and in Maine, and Vermont, and wherever else people are from in this room today, we need to go to our legislatures, and this is a great document to look at. We need something like this. We need to tell communities that they've got to be prepared and help them do it. A good idea does not have to pass Congress to be a good idea. Now, I am out of the whole, and I work for the government. I've worked for the government for 20 years. My favorite appointed government employee right now is Brock Long, the administrator of FEMA. Brock Long gets it. He knows what the problem is, and he knows what the solutions are. He was recently interviewed on EM Weekly. If you're in the emergency management realm, you might listen to that. It's a podcast by Todd DeVoe out of California. And he said, how are we actually going back to the old civil defense of the 1950s? And how are we putting our CERT teams on steroids? Oh, I love that. Remember at the beginning of the presentation how I said you people are the Green Berets in this fight? Well, for those of you who don't know what Green Berets are, the Army Special Forces, what happens is the Green Berets go into an area. They blend in with the indigenous population. They train, mentor, coach, and lead that indigenous population, usually to overthrow an oppressor. But in our case, our Green Berets, our CERT teams, our Medical Response Corps, all of our regular citizens like us who are concerned about this, we're already infiltrated into the indigenous population, okay, step one. Now we've got to train, lead, mentor our people, our communities in emergency preparedness. This is why I say, two of our federal Green Berets, Arlene and David, here from FEMA, they work right in the communities at the grassroots level, trying to get the emergency preparedness message. This is why I'm such a fan of Brock Long, and I will meet him someday. That's my, some people want to meet J-Lo or, Robert Redford or whoever. I want to meet Brock Long. That is one of my lifelong goals. I can check it off my bucket list. Here's what Brock Long just told us. We've got a mission, certain teams. We've got a mission now. So this is FEMA's strategic plan. FEMA's strategic plan says we need to build a culture of preparedness in the United States. We need to ready the nation for catastrophic disasters, and he wants to reduce the complexity of FEMA. Okay, good luck with number 3, Brock. That one's on you. But 1 and 2, he's asking us to do. Building a culture of preparedness. FEMA can't do that from a building in Washington, D.C. We got to do that from your neighbor's living room. We got to do that from the library. We got to do that from the church. This is a grassroots effort in emergency preparedness. That's how you build a culture. You know the Boy Scouts have a merit badge for emergency preparedness? So why aren't we partnering with the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and helping them to find projects on emergency preparedness? They're all looking for stuff. In many of the high schools, they have a requirement to do community service of some type in the high schools. Why aren't we in there with Teen Cert? And why aren't we in there in the high schools saying, hey, there's some great community preparedness projects that you can do to fulfill this requirement? So building a culture of preparedness, and we got a whole panel that's going to be talking about this afternoon of experts who can talk about it from many different angles. But we need to build a culture of preparedness. So put on your thinking caps, everybody. We've got to find a way to do this. This is our mission, the people in this room, and ready the nation for catastrophic disasters. And if Brock's successful with number 3, then hopefully we'll get some money to help do this. But that's okay. We honestly don't need money. And the biggest objection that I've gotten since I've kind of gotten into this business about talking about emergency preparedness, we don't have a budget for that. That's very true. My town has an emergency management budget of $500. Okay? That's my town's got $500 to prepare everybody. Is that going to work? No, it's not. And it's not going to work in any town. Justin Cates over here, who will be on a panel, he works for a city. He's probably got slightly more than $500 to work with. But do you have enough money to do everything you would want to do? No, nobody does. We got it. And we got to stop waiting for money to come. We need to find other ways to do it. One way to do it, we could start a nonprofit civil defense organization in our community. Guess what? Every community in the United States has a fire department and an ambulance, right? A lot of those are set up as nonprofits. They don't get money from the town. Some of them do. They're all structured different ways. Some of them are set up as nonprofits. And they raise their own money. They go out in the community and they do fundraisers and they raise money. And they get grants and, they scrap for everything they have. But they do it. We have fire departments and we have ambulances. So this is possible. Why can't we start nonprofit organizations in our communities that can go to the businesses and partner with the grocery store to get a generator? Talk about ways that we can do pre-disaster mitigation. We've got a lot of the resources in our communities already. We just need to identify them. We've got doctors, nurses, engineers. We've got construction workers. We've got plumbers. We've got all of the talent we need. We just need to find them. We've got to get to these people, find them, and get them on board with helping us develop an emergency preparedness plan. And every little bit helps. I'll admit it, 12-step program here. My name is Mike, and I'm a doomsday prepper. Okay, so am I ever going to feel like I am prepared for everything? No, I'm not. And guess what? If you ever do feel like you're completely prepared, it probably means you're complacent. So while most of us in this room, I would venture to guess, are more prepared than our neighbors are, because we're here today, and we're involved in CERT, or we're involved in FEMA or DHS, and so we know what the threats are, so probably we have more than 72 hours of food in our pantry. But no matter what, we can never feel like we're there, we're prepared, because then we get complacent. But every little bit we do is going to save lives. If there is, heaven forbid, a long-term national power outage, everything we did ahead of time is going to save somebody from starvation or a waterborne disease or some infection that we didn't have a medical facility for, and we don't have any antibiotics, and we didn't think about it ahead of time, and isn't it a shame that this little cut on his leg ended up killing him? So every little bit helps, and we need everybody in this fight. We've got an excellent group here, but this is just the start. And so, we're sending you out also kind of on a mission. I got a 10-foot rule. If you come within 10 feet of me, I'm going to talk about emergency preparedness. So that's what I need you to have too. Somebody comes within 10 feet of you, you talk about emergency preparedness. So we need to talk to our neighbors about it. We need to talk to our churches about it. We need to talk to people at work about it, our businesses. And, I like to say that all roads lead to civil defense. What we've been doing for the last few years hasn't gotten us to where we need to be. We've got new marching orders from FEMA. We need to build a culture of preparedness in the United States, and we need to prepare the nation for catastrophic disasters. So we need to all go back to our communities and figure out how we're going to do that. Happy to answer any questions.